Okay, so there's this actor, comedian guy, Dax Shepard. I don't know if you know him. He doesn't really act as much anymore. He's like a podcaster now. That's what everyone does, right? It's like when you're done, just make a podcast, right? So he's a podcaster, and where he just interviews famous people and just kind of talks about their life, and it goes all over the place when it comes to topics, right? And there was one where he's talking, and he said something that was really interesting. He said that how a lot of people perceive like Hollywood and Southern California and those types of people as people who do not care about purity, right? And he says that because a lot of people look at Hollywood and they look at that whole area. It's like, it's so hedonistic, right? That's a vocab word for some of you students. Hedonism basically just means like a belief that we should do whatever makes us feel good. If it feels good, do it. That's basically what hedonism, right? And so he says that like, hey, people don't think, Hollywood and that area of the country cares about purity because, that's what they see. But he says, oh, no. Oh, we care a lot about purity. We just direct it somewhere else. He goes, we direct it into food. And I was like, oh, right? Because that part of the country is all about clean eating, right? You better eat organic because if you have anything or no GMOs, it's like that's their purity, right? They might not care about some of the things that other people care about when it comes to like pure living, but when it comes to food, oh, they are very much interested, right? And so Shepard was saying like, hey, no, people do care about purity. It's just they direct it in different places, And I thought that was really true because when we think about purity, depending on how you grew up and what, where you're from and that kind of stuff, your mind goes to different things, right? But everyone does care about purity, whether it's in food or whether it's in like romantic relationships where they're like, oh, you gotta be pure in your relationships and your boundaries and that kind of stuff, right? Or even today we have purity in political ideology, right? It's like, oh, if you don't believe everything we believe, then you're like out. Like it has to be really extreme. It has to be exactly what it is, and there's no disagreement, right? Purity is important for humanity. We just direct it in different places, right? Even in your, like if you're a fan of something, my wife and I were watching some Star Wars shows now, like The Acolyte. It's really good. I liked it, right? But the comments, right? Hey, this isn't canon, which is like, like Star Wars fans are crazy. Like they say like, this happens, this is official, and if you deviate from that, you're a horrible person. And I'm sitting there going like, it's a fun show. I like the concept. The symbolism there is pretty good. All right, I enjoyed it, right? But there are people, right? You want to enjoy Star Wars? Oh, you need to be pure, right? And you cannot have these other ideas that weren't in the. Actually, I don't even know what exactly is canon, but there's like a list. There's a list, right? People care about purity. And that's kind of what we're talking about today in Leviticus, in this last third as we finish up. Last week, we were in Leviticus chapters 11 to 15, and there we talked about ritual purity. We were talking about like what in the Old Testament called it, what was clean and unclean. And we talked about how ritual purity actually just points to moral purity. And that's what we're in now. We're in chapters 17 to 26. So we're in 10 chapters, right? 10 chapters and one message is a lot, right? But we'll get through it quickly. Okay. And so remember, ritual purity also points to Jesus because Jesus is the ultimate person who can actually make us clean. And so that's kind of where we're at today. I'm going to use the term holy living, because that's kind of how people kind of understand, instead of the word moral purity, okay? And basically, purity is defined as like just free from contamination, right? And holy means set apart. So you see, they're a little bit different, but you see where I'm going with this, right? It's kind of the same, right? So it's holy living is the words I'm going to use, all right? And it is in chapters 17 to 26. We cover a lot of areas in life. And I want you to think about that and the fact that most of us, when we think about holy living or purity, right, we tend towards a few or maybe just one area in life, okay? But in these 10 chapters, the Bible covers a lot of areas, okay? And so basically what we're just going to do is we're going to fly through chapter by chapter, right? We got 10 to go, and then we're going to talk about, okay, sure, what does that mean for me today, okay? All right, here we go, right? Chapter 17, basically it's eating blood is forbidden, right? And so the question of, okay, why, right? I mean, there's obviously some food safety stuff here, right? Eating raw and undercooked meats is dangerous. Like we know that now, right? I mean, sure. Have you guys been to restaurants where the menu always has that, star at the bottom because they're gonna ask you, how do you want your steak done? And they just wanna be like, hey, listen, you want it blue? Sure. But eating uncooked, undercooked meat is dangerous, so it's on you, right? And so there is a food safety aspect of it. But remember, blood is also a symbol for life, right? And symbolism is really powerful. And so remember last week in Leviticus 11 to 15, ritual purity is a symbol for moral purity, right? And so what we see here is, okay, this idea of, hey, eating blood is forbidden. There is both like the physical safety aspect of it, and it points to the fact that holy living, when we think about it, holy living involves caring for life. And I think that includes the animals we eat, right? So you're like, oh yeah, holy living involves caring for life, like people, but it includes the animals we eat. One scholar suggested this, and I was like, oh, this is an interesting one, right? So there was a practice back then. We don't do it, actually we still do it now, very rarely, but there was a practice back then where, hey, I like my meat fresh, but I also don't have refrigeration. So what do I do? And what they would do is they would like get a chunk of meat from an animal and prepare and eat it, but keep the animal alive, so it can be fresh, right? Now we hear that and we're just like, I do like my bacon, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. Like, that's okay, that's difficult. But like, so one scholar says, like, is this kind of referencing that? We're like, hey, we are called to, like, holy living involves caring for life, all life, including animals as well, right? Actually, I said they still do that now because there is, I couldn't find the name of it, but there is like I think it's like a Japanese or a Korean cuisine where they can do that with fish. It's just like, I saw a video of it and I was like, oh, I'm not sure how I feel about this, But anyways, that's beside. Oh, so you heard about that? It's like they actually can cut a chunk of fish off, for sushi, and then the fish keeps on swimming. It's like, oh man. Okay, that's chapter 17. Eating blood is forbidden, right? It's about obviously food safety, but it's also about this symbolism of caring for life, because blood is a symbol of life. The second part we're doing is chapter 18, right? That's the nose of sex, right? Not going to go into it too much. We have kids here, right? But obviously there's health reasons, right? There's a lot of health reasons. But the second part is this. It is pointing at God's intention for sex, right? And so holy living also involves sexual behavior that is in line with God's intention. That's one way I think today we don't really talk about that. We just talk about like, oh, did the Bible say it's okay or not okay, right? But we never talk about, hey, how did God intend for this, right? And that's actually what we should be asking first, is not so much yes or no, it's what was God's intention in this practice, okay? And so chapter 19 is actually a bunch of miscellaneous laws. But what is included among those miscellaneous laws are the 10 Commandments, right? And it's a reminder of the 10 Commandments. And if you were here a couple of weeks or a few weeks ago, the 10 Commandments, at the heart of it is that it's about us, it's about humanity being an image bearer of God. How we bear God's image, right? Not literally, but like spiritually and that kind of stuff, right? And And so if we are image bearers, how do we relate and interact with God? And the second part is, if we are image bearers and all of humanity, we're all image bearers, then how do we relate and treat each other who are also image bearers, right? And so holiness involves that, and involves understanding that we as people, all of us, no matter where we come from, what we believe, all that stuff, we all are image bearers. And how we treat each other is important, and holiness is a part of that. Holy living involves that. Then we get to chapter 20. Chapter 20 is the punishment chapter, right? All these punishments, and that's a tough one to read. Just like, oh man, like, right? What the point of that is to point to the fact that holiness and holy living is serious, right? And it's all holiness. It's all serious. It's not just this part and that part, because we get like that. It is natural for us to have certain areas where we're like, oh yeah, you should not do that. If you do that, you're a terrible person. And then other areas we're like, well, that's not a big deal, right? This chapter is kind of pointing to the fact that all holiness is important. So we can't pick and choose which areas we're going to focus on, which areas we're going to, like judge people on, which areas we're going to be lax on, right? All holiness is serious. And then in chapters 21, 22, and then it goes to 24, it's all kind of connected, right? It's 21 is rules for priests, 22 is more rules for priests, and the nose of sacrifices, right? And then rule 24 it's an interesting chapter where we could probably do a whole series on that just chapter, but it's basically there's this ritual of putting out olive oil and bread for the Lord, and the situation where a blasphemer is put to death. A blasphemer, someone who commits blasphemy, for vocab word here, is just somebody who like seriously offends God with something they've done or said. Okay, and so all of these, like what's going on in these chapters, right? It's that our direct relationship with God is serious, pointing back to the whole idea of holiness is serious, right? Because so far, the areas of life that we've covered are more like, like life between us, right? Like how we eat, how we do our relationships and that kind of stuff, right? And so here, this is about the priest. This is about our direct relationship with God, how we interact with God. I think for today, how we should think about that is what do we do? How are we when we come to worship, right? And so do we come in with a heart that is focused on the Lord and saying, hey, God, I'm here to worship you, or are you here just to kind of like, check the box off of I've done what I'm supposed to do? Okay. And so I think that's kind of how we should think about it. In chapter 23, we have the festivals again. So we did back in Exodus chapter 23, in that message, we talked about all the festivals that God had called his people to do. Right? And remember, the festivals were about remembering stuff. It was about remembering how God rescued the people from Egypt, how we are dependent on God, and how God has provided. Right? So that's what the festivals were about. It's brought up again here because remembering these things, it legitimizes the pursuit of holiness. We're talking about this holy living and that kind of stuff. We never ask, okay, why? Like, why is it important, right? And it's because remember what God has done, remembering who we are worshiping. Right? That's important. Because once we remember who God is and what he's done, it makes that pursuit, makes like this whole idea of like, I'm going to live my life in a certain way, it makes it make sense. Because when someone like of integrity, right, someone you look up to who's a good person, he's got integrity and all that kind of stuff, says something, you listen, right? You're like, oh wow, I trust this person. This is like a good person. I'm going to listen. Right? And so that's what this whole festival, why the festivals are brought up again, is you say, hey, remember who we're worshiping. Remember what God has done. And remember who God is. And so that is why we do these things that do not make sense to everyone else as a way to be holy, to be set apart, right? Remember, it's symbolism. It's pointing to something else, right? It's pointing to Jesus. And that's why when we have these situations where a Christian leader has a scandal, it hurts the ministry and it hurts that message. I mean, I hope you guys think I'm all right, but if we got all this sound equipment back there, if our musicians and volunteers open those boxes and they find it's just rocks in there and I pocketed all that money, you guys may have a different way of listening to me when I'm speaking. Jesus talking about like holiness and that kind of stuff, and just pocket all that money from those that sound equipment, right? Right. And so remembering who God is important, right? Of who God is and what He has done. And then in chapter 5, we're getting to near the end. Chapter 25 is about the Sabbath year and the year of Jubilee. This is the fun one. Right, I think it's fun. I don't know why, but right. So the Sabbath year is letting the land rest every 7 years. Okay, and so you use the land, you plant, and all that kind of stuff. And every 7th year, you just let it rest. Right? We actually farmers still do that today. I don't know I don't know if they're doing it every 7 years, but letting the land rest is an idea called letting the land lie in fallow. Right, because what happens is the nutrients kind of get back in, that kind of stuff. You just keep farming the same land over and over and over again. It actually really kind of hurts the soil quality. Okay, and so there's that aspect. Right? I love that like Moses is like, soil pH? What's that, Lord? And God's like, trust me, just Sabbath year, right? Let the land rest every 7 years, right? And then the year of Jubilee, that is every 50 years, Israelites return to their allotted lands. And so basically, God has allotted different groups. Okay, this is your land over here. This is your land over here. This is your land over here, okay? But stuff happens, right? Somebody is just really good at farming and investing, and they get a lot of money. This guy over here, made some bad investments. He thought putting all his money in car washes was a good idea, No, you should put it in Bitcoin. No, just kidding. Right? And so what happens is, stuff happens and people go into debt, they sell their land, and stuff changes. And what God does here is says, hey, every 50 years, we do a hard reset. Everybody goes back to the land you were originally allotted. And so the purpose of this, the reason why God did this, it prevents cycles of intergenerational poverty, right? If your grandparents, made some bad investments, lost all the family wealth, and then from there, it's hard to get out. You could have cycles and generations of poverty here, right? And God sees that, and God says, no, we can't have that. And so every 50 years, there's going to be the year of Jubilee, right? Of course, man, I was just thinking, for American capitalists, that is insane, right? That is totally not how we in America think about money. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, I've earned this for 50 years. I've built my wealth and my family's wealth, and now I've got to give it back? Yeah, that's what God said. Right? Now, I'm not saying we should just switch because this is for the people of Israel. We're in America now. But the idea that holiness involves rest, right, with the Sabbath year. Holiness involves caring for people who are image bearers of God. So even if they've made decisions or things have happened and disaster happens to their life and they've gone into poverty, it doesn't matter who they are image bearers, and God cares about them, and so should we. And there's this acknowledgement. Now, holiness involves an acknowledgement, an action to alleviate inequality. Right? That is not something you hear talked about in the American church, right? And this, I don't know what that looks. I don't know what that would look like for us today. But holiness involves being serious about this as well. So that's a crazy one. You know, I'm just thinking how, like, in America, that's just like, you know. And the last chapter is chapter 26, we're going to talk about today. That chapter is a chapter of rewards for obedience and punishment for disobedience. And here again, the purpose of this chapter is to reiterate holiness is serious. And God's grace is also serious. Right? A lot of times, you know, we think of the Old Testament as this, as a section of the Bible where God is just like the angry old man. It's like, I'm gonna, you know, you do this, smite, lightning, you know, chasms opens up, which we'll talk about, right? We just think of like, oh, this is the God of the Old Testament is angry and like vengeful. But here it's you see both. Holiness is serious, but God's grace, his reward, is also very serious. And so those are the 10 chapters. Okay, what does it mean for us today? And I think there's 3 things that I'm gonna share. The first one is this: holy living is important because God is holy, right? With the festivals, like, what has God done? God has done so much, provided, and we depend on God. God is holy. In 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15 to 16, it says, "But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy." Right? Holy living is important because God is holy. That's like the number one reason of like why we in our lives should strive for holiness, is because God is holy. The second one is this: we can't pick and choose which areas of holiness we care about. Okay? We can't pick and choose. Now the question for us is this: what areas in life do you naturally understand holiness? Like, there's going to be certain areas in life where you're just like, oh yeah, I get that, and that resonates with me. Hey, thank God for that. Right? God has made you spiritually sensitive to certain areas in life. That's awesome, right? Lean into that. Like, really, like, continue to walk down that path. But also ask yourself, what areas do you naturally struggle with? Where you naturally are like, yeah, I don't really think about holiness there, or it's hard for me to be holy there, right? Ask God to make you more spiritually sensitive in those areas. Because here's the thing: you can't be more holy through sheer effort. That's literally one of the main messages of the gospel, is that we cannot be holy on our own. Through our own strength, we can't do it. Right? This is a part of the mystery of faith, when they talk about like the mystery of faith. Like, it's that we're called to be holy, and yet we can't do it. It's impossible. Right? But again, all this, like when you feel that, when you're like, hey, I understand this call to holiness, and it's just impossible. Yes, it is, and that should point you to Jesus. That's the whole point, is that no, we cannot live up to the standards of God and his holiness, and only Jesus can actually bring us there. Only Jesus can make us holy. So ask Jesus, right? That's a part of our prayer life, is to say, God, like, make me more holy every day, little by little. Because here's the thing: holiness through willpower often brings arrogance and pride, and that just makes you worse off than you started. Right? And I think a lot of us, that's kind of how we look at it. We're like, okay, I'm okay in this area, but I struggle here, so I've got to be more disciplined. Yes, you know, I'm going to wake up earlier. I'm going to maybe have like a journal. That'll be good. That'll make me hard. Like, we think of all these things to do, and you know what? Those things aren't bad. Those things, they're good. They're good tools to use. But when we think about how do we live in a way that honors the Lord, and we think about it in a way that is through my abilities and willpower, oh man, it's very dangerous there. Right? Now we should try, we should do our part, but it a lot of times brings arrogance and pride, and that's like even worse, right? And so we got to remember, right? It's actually Jesus that does this stuff. Jesus is the one that transforms us. And when we realize that, and we start actually having our lives changed and transformed, our behavior changed, we don't become prideful. What we do is we thank God. Wow, look at what God has done in my life. Okay? So we can't pick and choose which areas of holiness we care about. And so the third one, the last one, this we'll end with, is this. We all have blind spots. Kind of goes back to the previous one. We all have blind spots in our faith, so show grace to others, right? Grace is simply an undeserved gift. So if we all have areas in life that we're not going to be able to see well, then we should show grace to other people when they struggle with different stuff. And so the question is, where are your blind spots? You know, through self-reflection, you might be able to figure them out, right? But they are called blind spots for a reason, because you just can't see them. And so I would also ask God to reveal those blind spots to you. That's hard. That's hard when you say, God, I know there's stuff about me that does not please you that I don't even know about. And could you show me? And when God does that, that's not a pleasant experience, but that's important. Another one is ask someone who is wise, that you trust, who loves the Lord, because they might be able to spot areas in life that are your blind spots. And the thing is this, not everybody has a person like that in their life. Like when you get married, your spouse often becomes that person, like, because they get to know you really well and they like know your faults, right? But not everybody has that. And so if you don't have that person, ask for that. That is the kind of friend that is worth more than gold, right? Someone that you can trust, that is wise, that loves you and cares about you, and can actually spot your blind spots, and is willing to tell you in a gentle way. That is so valuable. So definitely ask the Lord for that as well. And so it's this, right? Holy living is important because God is holy. We can't pick and choose which areas of holiness we care about, and we all have blind spots. So when we're dealing with people who are struggling with stuff, show grace, because God has shown and given us so much grace. Let's pray.